Welcome to the Becoming Dauntless podcast. This week we are joined on the show by Daniel Meeks as our first guest in our deep dive series on extended reality. Dan is an immersive reality professional with a background in military simulation, including joint fires, air navigation, and electronic warfare. Dan served 11 years in the U.S. Air Force as an AC-130U electronic warfare officer and an instructor combat systems officer. The AC-130U is a version of the Hercules aircraft, which is a heavily armed gunship used for close air support and armed reconnaissance. After the service, Dan spent 14 years working on the U.S. Air Force's most widely deployed commercial simulation entity generator and customized image generators used in various weapons systems and network readiness centers. He's been heavily involved in XR throughout his career, and most recently, Dan started Defiant XR to narrow in on that focus on extended reality. My name is Laura Lee Elliott, and I'm here with Dauntless co-founder and my co-host, Sophia Lazaro. Dan, welcome to the show. And to kick things off, can you tell us a bit more about how augmented, mixed, and virtual reality is used in the military, and how is XR used in defense today?
Great. Well, if you ever visit a military installation, you'll find that it's a small microcosm of civilization. So everything that you have in a city, you have on a base. That also means that everybody that is providing a function on that installation has a mirror profession in the outside world. So that ranges everything from medical to civil engineering to police to fire department. Everything you see outside in the real world, as we used to say, is there. And that's why a lot of people join the military, because it's a great way to gain experience, when you're very young, and that really puts a foot in the door. What's really amazing about XR in the military is that it's a launching off point for all sorts of things. It's not just the thing that I do, which is more the tactical side of things. There's all sorts of stuff that you can do with XR.
To follow up on that, I know we're a little bit biased in favor of the Air Force here, because that was our first government customer, and you obviously worked for the Air Force extensively. But are there any agencies, branches, or units that are leading the charge in and pushing the limits of how XR is used today?
First, I got a caveat that the federal government is still very large, and so is the entire enterprise of things that you can do in XR. And I spend the grand part of my day just trying to keep an eye on what's going on. And there's all sorts of projects, research projects, university projects that I've never heard before that have been around for 5 years. So there may be some successes that are out there that no one's ever heard of because they're fully funded and they're not asking for more money at the moment. So with that caveat, the things that have bubbled to my attention are things like medical training, like SimX. There's a marine boat simulator that is using the HTC system that seems widely used. And then you have some of the things that have been around for a little bit longer that you don't hear about much anymore, like the pilot training transformation. I have some colleagues that are still at the 19th Air Force, and there are things that are still going on, but they don't really make press releases of what they're doing.
We've seen that a lot on the civilian side, but occasionally we'll see something come out of DARPA and we're like, they were working on that? They have that? There was one citation that came up, Sophia, with the AI image. Do you remember which one I'm talking about?
They have their own computer vision model.
And we were like, oh, they went and did that. Okay. And for a lot of the tech that's out there, we'll probably never know.
The whole valley of depth, where you have great studies, but then actually getting into warriors' hands, what that giant leap is.
It's a giant leap, and it's hard to do it right. Who do you think is doing it best? Or are there certain use cases doing it best? And how do you think they're measuring or observing that ROI for the warfighters?
Well, coming from my background is special operations. Now, I still got a beer belly. I had a beer belly when I was in the service. So I'm not going to talk like SEAL Team 6 or anything. But the way special operations works is that they do what everyone else is not doing. So when you talk about disruptive stuff, things that are non-typical, trying things out, experimenting, that happens a lot more on the special operations side. The white special ops and the black special ops, where things are a little bit more getting closer to those three-letter agencies that nobody really wants to talk about. And they get to do all sorts of stuff on a very small scale, but they have a big bucket of money that they can reach into. And obviously a lot of that stuff doesn't transfer out into the larger industry, but it also works really well because they don't need to scale it. You probably read all the time all these wonderful papers from universities saying, wow, we figured out how to make a battery that's as thin as cloth, and then you realize that the second you hold it, it falls apart, So that's a lot of the problem in is that scaling things up. It might work well. So what you do is you hand it to a special operator and say, don't break this thing. There's only 3 of them in the world. And they're usually pretty good about that. I think special operations is really where a lot of they call the tip of the spear for the reason. And that's the case.
That's so interesting. I feel like here's this thing, there's only 3 of them, don't break it, is like the opposite of what you do in commercial when you're trying to do user research. You're like, here's this thing, please break it so I can see where else I need to shore up the code base or the user interface or whatever. So it's interesting that it's almost the reverse. But I guess if it's more of a lab level experimentation with XR, then it makes more sense. Do you think there's any specific ROIs that is pushing anything out to the warfighter at this point? Or are we still kind of in that stage where there's interest and investment, but it's very much at that lab experimentation level inside of the military?
What I see are 2 different strategies. One is sell by volume. So put as many of these things out here and show how diverse we can use them. And they have their own kind of success story. But the other side is we'll do low volume, very close to the requirements hardware. So let's just say at Vario, for instance, where the government has all these very stingy rules, and any engineer that's working on it is like, oh, you're going to ruin everything. What do you mean we have to use a cable? But then they're like, well, you're putting in an order for how many hundred? Okay, cable it is. You have this one section that's just like, okay, we're really going to tailor to all of your security needs and exactly what you need it for. And in Vario's case, most of the time what it's used for is for cockpit training. Where the user's seated, so they're not going to trip themselves up with a cable, and they have a very certain field of view and acuity requirement. And you know what? You can be a little bit heavier because you're not walking around and knocking your head around. So it's a bit of a trade-off, but on the other side, you need something that's a little bit more robust, something that's easy to at least exchange. I mean, field repairable would be amazing, but I don't think anybody's gotten to that point yet. And then those are more kind of on the medical side, furthest away from any kind of security consideration. So 2 different strategies.
Yeah, we see a lot of the cockpit trainers. I would agree with you that I think that is one of the areas that, again, coming from the civilian side, that it appears that there's a lot of ROI because there is a lot of pull for sales for those items. And I think it makes sense that we've been using simulators for decades to train pilots. And if we can achieve the quality of training outcome with a simulator with something that is a little bit more mobile, even if it has a cable, with an XR headset, then yeah, it's a worthy investment. What other things do you think are driving the interest and the investment in XR from the DoD or from the military right now?
So now probably with your dealings with the federal government so far, there's a lot, I call it, as a former aviator, induced drag, where there's just this bureaucracy, and you have a feeling that some of them really like the bureaucracy because it keeps them occupied and keeps them paid. So you run into this stuff, but at the same time, you have a competing force that wants to streamline things, move a little bit faster. And so you have these opportunities in XR where someone realizes, wow, I could just put on a headset. I don't need $1 million projection dome. The people that are managing the $1 million projection dome system are like, well, crap, now you can buy a new headset every 2 years. You just messed up all of our paperwork. In the past, they're like, hey, this dome is going to be sitting here. Actually, we built an entire building and spent a whole bunch of money to make certain that this thing's air conditioned. And yeah, it just throws a wrench into everything that they do when they go to work every day. So it's competing.
We saw that, we encountered that on the commercial side as well, trying to introduce XR. The customer, the user realizes, oh, we could have all of these productivity gains if we move to an augmented reality based system, or if we digitize these workflows. It is going to completely upset the apple cart of how we run these processes, and we already have all of our people and our procedures in place. Like, it's easier to make that call to say, nah, the next guy can figure this out, the next gal can figure it out. One thing you mentioned about volume and selling to the government, because we're a non-traditional defense contractor, right? Like, we came from the commercial side. Sophia and our CTO James have worked for Fortune 100 companies, so like polar opposite of selling to the government, and especially selling to defense. When we were working with NASA, they were very upfront about it. They were like, we're not going to do volume. There's only one International Space Station, and we've got 8 astronauts. So you do that math, like how many licenses are you going to sell? How many headsets are you going to sell realistically? They're a fantastic research partner. Some of the best use cases, I was going to say in the world, but they go off world. So like in our solar system to work on, but they were like, we're not your volume customer. You're not going to sell us 1,000 of these. And I think that's one of the things, maybe the misconceptions people get when they go to sell to the federal government or go to become a defense contractor. They get dollar signs in their eyes and they're like, oh, we can sell all of these things. Not necessarily. If it's a very specialized piece of equipment, a very specialized piece of software, that you can figure out how to sell it and they'll figure out how to buy it, but that doesn't mean that you're going to sell hundreds and thousands of them.
Absolutely.
And that is a point I really want to drive home to people that are considering getting into the industry. You have to go in with eyes wide open, especially if you have investors.
Just mentioning my strategy, I'm not trying to take over the world with XR. I have a very specific set of problems that I want to solve with my company, and I'm not considering, going giant and having my own giant office building someday. I just want to make enough to be wealthy enough, and I don't really want to get to a large size. And you know what? Throughout my career, there's plenty of companies that have stayed afloat for decades fitting that need. And and whatever kind of outside investment they have, they still get great returns. You just don't expect to sell 20,000 headsets. It's just not in the cards. So.
I think that's such an underrated entrepreneurship, like self journey to have, is what kind of entrepreneur you want to be, because there is something, we made a very similar choice, clearly. It's something to being said for being an entrepreneur where you're like, there is a need, there is a market that can support a profitable company. It's not maybe going to be a unicorn, but it's a product I want to build. It's a technology I want to work with, and there are people who need it. So let's go build it. And I think we're getting into other topics here, so Laura Lee's going to pull me back to our questions in a second. But I think the hype cycle around XR was like part of the problem, because it was like everything is going to happen in XR, and it's like, or XR is a medium. There are certain use cases and certain contexts and content in which that medium is the most appropriate to apply. Yes. And there's plenty of opportunity in there. It's not the next cell phone, which is, I think, in my experience going through the early AR, it was really the AR, but now XR hype cycle, was that it was branded as like, this is the next cell phone. And I don't think it is. But that doesn't mean that there aren't incredibly valuable things we could work on. Are there any surprising under the radar applications that, from your experience in the military or now working as the contractor side, that you've seen for XR that you're watching or you're working on?
Right now, the MetaQuest is everywhere. It's almost ubiquitous. So that pass-through type of AR is very present. Just about everybody knows about it now. You'd be very surprised if you find somebody that hasn't recognized those things. So the things that I'm starting to see are more additive style AR displays. So, you have things like Rivet, which, not to knock on their marketing, but like they made a marketing push, and I'm like, okay, what's next? You showed some pretty cool stuff. I want to know what you want to do with this next, and if you're going to invite developers like me to build on stuff, because it would be pretty cool. And then you have people like DigiLens, which is very similar, and they've been around for a long time, but now they made this push to a very lightweight headset. I think it's called the Argo. And man, there's all sorts of cool stuff that you can do with it. And I'm eager to work with it. I got a whole bunch of ideas of what can be really useful with that type of headset. So things that are, because one thing that I've noticed over time with pass-through types displays is that even that small bit of lag that you get with the camera reproducing the vision in your eye, that little bit of lag is enough to induce any kind of sim sickness, which will turn a lot of people off. And if you can get that motion to photon really short in an additive display, where what you're showing doesn't swim around as you move your head around, that's really key to keeping people from feeling ill. So those additive displays are the things that I'm really keeping an eye on. And I think Vuzix is another one, which, bonus points for them for being a totally American company. So on the defense side, that's very huge, where you're not having to do the supply chain risk management kind of thing. And, the deal with Meta and Anduril really perked up my interests. And I was like, okay. I remember the early days, so that's interesting that you made up. So I'm wondering where that's going to go. And the tail end of that, the things that are really interesting me are the transmission methods. So you have things like Li-Fi, and you have companies like Wireworks and G-Rains. These are other ways of doing wireless transmission other than just regular old Wi-Fi. So I don't know if you run into this, but with me, when you try to deploy an XR headset, you get a security manager that says, nope, that's Bluetooth, you can't use it here. And I'm like, well, there's other ways that you can do this, It doesn't always have to be a cable. So I'm glad that these other possibilities are now on the market. They're mature products, and you can show a brochure to a security manager like, see, no one's going to steal your data. It's impossible for the waveform to leave the building. So things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I would love to see more pass-through headsets on the market. I definitely think that's the future. It was one of the things that I liked the most about the HoloLens was that it didn't take the pass-through approach. It was just a much more comfortable experience than the MetaQuest or the HTC Vive. The Meta and Android thing, this is my hot take on that, is Palmer Luckey had kind of two choices when it came to wanting to build the headset of his dreams for the DoD under Andorra. He could either out-invent himself or he could go get access to his patents that went with the sale of Oculus to Meta.
Yeah.
And I think there's some aspects of the headset where he's going to go out-invent himself. And then there's some aspects where he's like, no, I just need to go license that. And it was so interesting that it was branded as a partnership. And I was like, no, this is a licensing deal. Like, man, I would love to see the terms of this licensing deal for effectively getting access to the IP he invented, but he sold with Oculus. And really there was no downside for Meta. That's not a market that they want to go after. And now they can make licensing fees off of IP that they own in another way besides selling MetaQuest.
Yeah,
so
they gobbled up all the scientists.
For them, it's a win-win.
Yeah.
And I'm sure for Palmer Luckey, it's a trade-off, but it will probably allow him to move a lot faster with whatever Anduril wants to release.
Yeah, that's an accurate take. I absolutely agree with that.
I was in Long Beach right after that deal was announced, and Palmer did a keynote. This was at AWE, and he referred to the partnership as him getting his toys back. Their words, not mine.
So confirmed. That's exactly what it was then. But yeah, everyone's like, oh, Meta's getting into DoD. And I was like, no, they're not. No. Palmer wants his patents. Yeah. Like, that is what is happening here.
He did say that there were all these pictures of him with Zuckerberg, like shaking hands and everything. He did say like a couple of times that the ousting and the beef was not with Zuckerberg, it was with someone else on the Meta team that all went down with. So I don't think it was maybe necessarily as awkward as people think to go back and have those conversations, because that person, whoever it was, I don't know, they're gone. They're no longer at the company. And I don't think the warfighter has to worry about like a Meta Horizons little avatar popping up in a headset anytime soon.
Yeah, and in some of my circles, the thing that a lot of us are really hoping for, we call it the XR Jeep. So it's just like the Jeep from World War II, it made this kind of civilian jump. So if Anduril can come out with a headset and then they in turn license it, so second party license, or everyone else, I know it's easier said than done with a lot of ITAR related stuff, but man, it would be great to have a ruggedized enterprise XR headset that's been combat proven, and you just slap yellow paint on it and then you can use it on a construction site. That would just be really cool.
Yeah, because the closest thing we have today is RealWear, and that's a heads-up display, right? You can't do true mixed reality or spatial computing with it. That doesn't mean that it doesn't serve its purpose and it doesn't have real use cases, but it's not the same as what you're talking about. What is your wish list for Anduril's headset? Like your feature wish list?
Oh, wow. Yeah. So I want a spatial positioning system that is totally integrated with RTK and broadcast positioning system. So what you essentially have is GPS RTK, a BPS, and that'll get you really, really close to where you actually are, and then you do computer vision on top of it. So a system that you pretty much, you turn it on anywhere in the planet, and within a minute or two, it knows exactly where it is and where it's facing. Having something that I can take outside in the Florida heat and go walk a mile in. I have my poor HTC XR Elite, and that sucker's just trying its best, but I know someday I'm going to break it, because I'll go out in my front yard, I'm just like, God, it's really hot for this thing. It hasn't complained yet, but so if I can get it to operate, if I can get it to operate outdoors, well, just like you take your cell phone, out to the beach, you don't leave it out in the sun so it can melt, you put it underneath an umbrella, you kind of take care of it, but you kind of expect it to work outside. And that's really the big thing that I want is a headset that I can use outdoors, something with self-sealing lenses on it. You look at thermal imagers that are out there, they have a cool mechanism where when you press your eye against it, it actually opens up the iris. So when you take it off, it closes it and keeps the sun from burning in. So that stuff's been solved. It's just a matter of reducing the weight. So yeah, I would love a pass-through system that I can take outside and go for a walk and I'm still tracking perfectly. That's my wish list.
That's solid. Yeah. I wish it wasn't a pass-through system. I understand all the reasons why it probably will be one, but I still wish it won't be a pass-through system.
Okay, let's compromise on that. Local dimming. So I remember seeing some papers of you kind of get best of both worlds. So you get that additive ability, but anything that you draw it ends up being almost solid pixels. Because that's the problem with additive, is that, you look towards the sun and you're trying to compete with a thermonuclear detonation. Sun wins every time. So that's one. So take joint fires, what I do. So if you have an airplane coming in and you look anywhere near the sun, you don't see anything. But if you have a pass-through display and you look near the sun, the sun's still bright, but I can still see the outline of that aircraft. So if you can get additive to do the local dimming to where it actually can dim that background and show the model, perfectly cut out of the real world, that's the ultimate solution. But I think the optics, it's really hard to do. Get there someday. Maybe I'll be retired by then.
I think if Magically had the time, they would have been able to crack that nut because of how good their displays were. I still have a Magic Leap, so I talk about them in the present. But no, it's a good point.
Yeah, well, Magic Leap did start that local dimming. They were marching down that way, and I think the end goal is to get it to where it's actual polygon dimming as opposed to just a cell of the display. Yeah.
Earlier you mentioned like the final piece of the puzzle of localizing the headset would be computer vision. What role, if any, do you think AI, whether it's computer vision or some other form of AI, plays in XR and XR adoption?
Okay. So there was something that the Air Force Agency for Modeling and Simulation, AFMS, it's like spelling out SHIELD from Marvel. So what AFMS came out with was a planning app. And the whole purpose behind it was to educate all the warriors what was out there in the industry. And they wanted it to be AI powered because nobody knows what all the rules are. Because you'll show up at one customer location and you get this whole new set of rules for what you're supposed to do with your device. In another place, they're like, yeah, that's cool. Just go ahead and deploy it. We're fine here. It's never consistent. Every customer treats things differently. So the idea is that you end up with this AI that kind of learns from all these conversations and will tell somebody that is trying to deploy XR, hey, here's all the security considerations that are actually in the rules and the things that will get your commander in trouble if you don't follow them. And here's the stuff that's actually just a falsehood and doesn't apply anymore because of these policy letters that came down. Using AI just to inform people on how to weigh the security risks will help with adoption across the board. I know it's not very sexy, but it's one of those things that will absolutely solve a lot of problems if you get an AI-powered solution. What is it called? Louis Rosenberg's company. It's a cognitive. It's a system that will network a whole bunch of inputs and kind of figure out where there's kind of a collaborative AI. So everybody kind of sends in their case study of their journey of deploying XR and all the speed bumps that they ran into. And it kind of brings in this coalesced idea of how you should proceed. I really think that's the big thing that AI can do.
And would you include computer vision as AI in this case?
Yes. I was talking more on the administrative side of things, but there's also the matter of reducing the weight, reducing the battery. One of the things that I'm keeping an eye on are event cameras and neuromorphic cameras, I think they're called, where you can start to build your precision tracking of your environment using that. Chances are when you use these headsets over and over again, you're using them in the same spot. So as you're using it in the same spot over and over again, it's like, I know this room. I know where, that cobweb hasn't moved in 3 months. I'm going to use that as something to anchor on. And the precision of your tracking improves over time. So I think that is a huge thing for AI to keep it on the edge. Make certain that it doesn't get up to the mothership. Use that to store in there. And a small segue, we had something in the military called a zero-wise button. Say I'm talking to you over a secure radio. We have a graphic key in order to make certain that nobody listens into our conversation. And if my aircraft is about to crash, or we're about to get captured, something bad's about to happen, we can flip up the zero-wise switch and dump all the data. I would love to have a zero-wise switch for all this new AI stuff that's coming out. So if you go into a skiff and you're doing all sorts of secret squirrel stuff and you got to take that device out of the skiff, you just go dump and everything's gone. All the stuff that it did in that room, it completely forgot about. All the zeros and ones are fried. It's completely zeroized. Love to see that. But nobody's really offering that yet.
That sounds like the thing James built.
Oh, cool.
It was for a different use case,
Yeah.
but he built a burn policy inside of one of our applications because we had concerns about some of the data. And so if a session stalls, so like people take the headsets off but don't terminate it for a certain period of time, the burn policy activates, or if the session is ended, the burn policy activates. But it's not a button the user pushes. I guess they do push it by ending the session, but we also have it built into the software that where there's events that will trigger it. I love the idea though of a digital version of that. I also love the idea of rebranding skiffs to secret squirrel stuff. That's like the best rebrand. I think
Yeah.
I think the military should run with that.
Oh yeah, they have patches
For sure.
Yeah, with little squirrels on them. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So they do.
Exactly.
They do.
That's perfect.
For
I love that.
our non-military savvy users, could you explain what a SCIF is?
Yeah, is it a special compartmentalized information facility? Yeah. It's a special facility that is made according to certain rules, like the walls need to go all the way to the roof, so you can't, climb through the rafters and then put a spy device. You can't put any holes in the wall, so you can't, drill a hole in the wall and put up your favorite poster. The communication lines that go in and out are highly regulated, going through special conduits. There's all these rules that are in place, and among them are depending on the location and the security posture, you're not supposed to use any wireless technology inside of there. So they have certain rules for if you bring any kind of information technology into that space, either it stays there, which happens a lot. You bring a laptop into that SCIF and 10 years later, it's still there. And the only way it's coming out is if you completely wipe that drive, wipe the RAM, take it out in pieces. So a SCIF is like this special sacred place where the secrets live, and you make certain that nothing comes in or out. And I think that's a good way to think of AI. Think of it like somebody who has a security clearance. We can't mind wipe people, or at least the government won't say they can. And so you have to have this level of trust, that you can trust them with the data, and they're not going to take it somewhere else. So, if somebody has a security clearance, obviously the working papers that they have to stay in that SCIF. So you can't just take your working papers with your secret notes and walk outside the building and go home with them. And I think that's a good way for people to really approach AI is, hey, you just gave us a whole bunch of information in this learning model. You got to be able to keep that stuff in that spot and not take it anywhere.
And is that your main concern with AI getting too integrated into XR, the security
Absolutely.
component and what it might do? And okay.
I've been kind of a squeaky wheel on this Android XR, which when you think about it just as an engineer, oh man, this is great, because we've been ham-fisting Android into these little tiny devices, which are just glorified, mobile phones. But now we're going to get our own dedicated operating system that's optimized for XR. Woohoo! Oh, great, it has Gemini. No, I don't want that. I want it off. It's nothing but a liability. And the thing is, I've been asking everybody, hey, can we turn Gemini off? Because it sounds cool for a lot of people, but I want a big old off switch and make sure that it never turns on. So that is my main concern as these larger commercial off-the-shelf solutions, they want to go down this AI rabbit hole. Not rabbit hole, but that's a means of getting investment. They wave the word AI, they come up with a solution. It is kind of cool. It does scale in volume, but for use cases where security is a really big deal, or enterprise for that matter, you can't have something that's chatty or leaky, and that's my concern about AI.
Yeah, it's a fair concern when it's a feature that you can't control, right? And it's a feature you can't turn off, and it's deeply integrated into the bottom. Like, yeah, you have a ton of consequences that I'm sure were not the vision of the developers building it, but can cause real harm. I mean, this is an unrelated example because it's not AI, but a related example of a feature having unintended consequences is Instagram rolled out location sharing and defaulted people to on. So there are public influencers who suddenly had their home address revealed, or where they go to pick up their kid from daycare revealed, right? Because we were not notified that you had been one of the users it had been rolled out to, because it was rolled out in stages, and it was not default off. It was default on. So I think it's totally fair to say, like, I'm happy to use this operating system, but give me a way to control AI as a feature, not necessarily as a core component. You've mentioned security as like a use case, particularly in these military environments where there's a lot of cybersecurity requirements. Are there other use cases when using AI do you think is not the right call outside of the security component? And like, what criteria would you encourage developers to use when they're looking at determining this?
The software that I specialize in can be often used for wargaming. And what I see a lot as I do my research are people that want to create pure AI wargaming solutions, which sounds novel, sounds amazing. But when you start thinking about it, when you either do training or wargaming, you want the conditions to always be the same. It's the same rules every single time. Let's talk about the training side first, and then I'll talk about the wargaming. When you train somebody in the military, you have a approved curriculum, and you train them all the way to what you are allowed to train them on. You give them a fair shake. So if you have to wash them out, you said, hey, we did everything within our power, you didn't meet the standards, So, if you do substandard to one student and you go way over on another, that's not consistent. That's not fair. But the other side of it, though, is that you can have an amazing instructor, that is working within that curriculum and does an amazing job, and pulls you through. I hope I was one of those instructors when I was teaching, but I was bound by the curriculum that I was authorized to teach for my schoolhouse. So one of the solutions to that is that you use AI on one side, but you pair it up with a scripting system that is very rigid and has rigid rules to it. So you have something that is very human-like, which is very creative, thinks outside, and finds all these, relationships, but it's bound within a scripting system that is very unique. So that's the case with a wargaming system as well. You want to be able to run these scenarios, but you have to be able to rerun them time and time again with the same rule set. That a 105 millimeter does exactly what it did in this past war game as it will in the future war game. So when you compare results, you know that you're doing, apples to apples. And when you use AI, it's coming up with the variables in real time and saying, you know what, I think the explosion of a 105 millimeter howitzer is this today. No, you can't do reliable wargaming with that. So
it's too variable. Interesting. So is the thought process in terms of using AI in wargaming, is the use case that like the enemy could be a synthetic enemy? Is that the use case that we're predominantly talking about, or that the environment would actually be adapting to AI conditions or to conditions in AI set?
Yeah, so it would be like another human player that is interacting with the scripting system, and so is highly reactive to all the inputs that are going on, just like a human would be on the other side of a war game. Or with training, so you have a training agent that's walking through with things. Like one of the big things that they wanted with Joint Fires is for a JTAC to walk into the dome, hit the big red button to start the simulator, and just talk to the sim, saying, I want 4 T-55 tanks, one click out, spread out 250 meters. And he would just say that into the microphone and the thing would magically holodeck it. They wanted that 10 years ago. It's kind of a big ask.
I think everyone wants a holodeck.
Oh yeah, but the thing is, I think we're getting closer and closer to it. But the thing is that if you're going to do that kind of natural language programming, you want it to interface with it. So there's an excellent example of this, which is an ASOC trainer, which is the Air Support Operations Center. It's essentially pushing tin for aircraft that are coming in and out of the battle space that'll do bombing runs, essentially. You got to get them to the battle space and then out of the battle space to land or either refuel or rearm. Before AI really took off, there was a company called Discovery Machine, and they did a natural language processing product that interfaced with the radios. So the people that are talking to aircraft, they're pretending that they're talking to some F-16 fighter pilot that just checked in and is getting routed to wherever the JTAC wants them to go. They just naturally talk on the radio and the thing talks back. So when I went to this exercise and I'm just seeing the waveforms going crazy on the screen, I'm like, half of that is a robot. That is so cool. And that was many years ago, So I could just imagine what it is now. But that's the thing. It interfaced with an existing scripting model, which is we're going to use this aerodynamic model that's already on the books of how to fly this thing to that point so it can drop its bombs. Yeah.
That makes sense. With or without AI, it feels like there's a lot. Oh, sorry, Lorelei, were you about to jump in?
I was just going to say, it sounds like the kind of heuristic or rule of thumb that you're getting at is don't use AI in instances where you need a really reliable, consistent output without giving the AI parameters to make sure it does that. Yes, you can use AI in this wargaming use case, but maybe you use it to replicate another human player where there isn't one. So instead of it being like human versus game, it's human versus AI, which is a step in between the two. Maybe you could make it as good as playing another human as far as decision making and randomness and all of that. But it sounds like that is maybe one of the like rules of thumb, litmus test methods of determining, do I inject AI here? Depends on what kind of outputs you need and what kind of inputs you're going to have.
I thought it was fascinating in your previous podcast that you were talking about all the ways to interact with AI. And with my journey with AI, maybe I'm just getting a little too fossilized, but I look at it as a firewall to use the chat window, because that's my way of making sure I don't overshare, that I put exactly what I mean to share inside of that thing, and then I get exactly what I get out. So when you go to a secure facility, they call them man traps. They're these narrow little hallways that are in between two doors, and you squeeze through that. So if there's any kind of security problem, they lock both of the doors. Because tailgating's a huge problem. Somebody buzzes in, opens the door, then somebody slides right past. But if you have two sets of doors in a narrow hallway, it's very hard to tailgate. So it's almost like that. That's or like a box office, where you got a little tiny hole that you talk to people. That's that's how I treat AI with my business,
Mhm.
is to make sure I don't overshare, don't give away too much information. Yeah, who knows? I might change over time, but it seems to
I
work for
think
me.
it's fair.
Yeah.
I think it's fair, and I think it's a creative analogy to say that the chatbot is a firewall. One of the things that we've played with and I hope becomes more possible as the hardware improves is on device processing,
Hmm.
because I think you can gain a lot of the benefits, particularly like I think a lot of the benefits that we talked about in that podcast episode were very connected to object recognition and computer vision in general. I think
Yeah,
when you can
me
do
too.
on processing, you can get a lot of the benefit without as much of the risk. Obviously, with the really lightweight glasses, that's not possible. We ran as an experiment an on-device model on a Meta Quest 3, and it did it, but it struggled after some time, particularly because it was doing real-time inferencing. So agreed. I think there is value in the chatbot, but I would love to see the hardware get to a point where it can
Yeah.
support more on-device processing, because just like people now are getting more intelligent about using less cloud-based LLMs and running models locally on their machine, I'd love
Hmm.
to see that happen in the XR market as well.
I'm hoping by the end of the year I have a in-home model that will be my wingman in the simulator. And I just talk to it,
That's
being
cool.
like, hey, fire on my target, and it knows exactly what I'm saying. Because it's interfacing, it's just like I said before, where it's not building its own simulation software. It's using the same scripting that I'm using as I'm flying my simulator, and it knows exactly what I'm talking about. To your point about like my dream system, having that on edge, on device model. So, like I was saying before, having a BPS, GPS, RTK, LMNOP, you have this precise measuring system, and then it has a very low resolution, like OpenStreetMaps on board. And it says, all
Mm-hmm.
right, according to his coordinates, he's standing in the middle of an intersection. I'm expecting a stop sign at his 2 o'clock if he's facing this right way. And it sees the outline of that stop sign and goes, I know exactly where he is and where he's standing. And that stays on the device. Man, that would be cool. So I hope
Right.
that that's the eventuality of what is out there. I mean, that's how humans work, right? We look for landmarks. You drop us in a
Exactly.
local area, we're like, there's a church steeple, there's that bridge. I'm about right here. Well, why not have that happen on the device?
Love that. That's where the future should go, right? And
Yeah, yeah.
hopefully we and other developers lead it there. But
I call it digital homesteading. So like
digital homestead.
I have my own network storage device it's just crammed full of hard drives, and I'm going to build my own LLM, and I'm growing beans out in the front yard. So I mean it's the same as gardening to me. So yeah, digital homesteading. Yeah.
I love that. I grew a lot of beans this summer and then the bunnies found them. So my green bean supply has been dried up, literally. It's very sad, but they don't like the tomatillos. So there's a lot of salsa in my future, which is great. But digital homesteading, I love that. I want to jump to the last question. What excites you about the future of XR and defense?
So the current state of XR is it's a highly globalized world. Just about everything you buy has a made in China sticker on it. It's just the way it is. Like an American company still manufactures or at least assembles a lot of their stuff in China. And that makes it very difficult to do anything with the federal government. You have this TAA compliant where you have to prove that most of the 50% of the parts. It's a real pain. So the thing that I'm excited about is that more stuff is going to be onshored, and then I'll have my Harley Davidson version of a XR headset. I turn it on, it makes a screaming eagle sound. So that's going to be pretty cool. I got this totally made in the European Union Somnium Space VR1 right here, and it's great. It's a great headset. So that's an example of having more and more options that aren't relying on this global network of supply. So, if I want an Indian made headset because there's something really cool about it that I want to do on the enterprise side, not necessarily the government side, I'd like to have that option. It's another approach to engineering that when everything's homogenized and they share the same vendors, what was it? Pico and Meta shared the same hardware
Mm-hmm.
vendor at one time. So the same
Mm-hmm.
headsets were practically made on the same line. Yeah, I'm excited about that kind of fracturing a little bit and seeing some more variants, but also sticking to standards. So I end up with an OpenXR headset that I just turn on, and it's going to stick to the OpenXR standard when I run my software, but I have a lot of variability in where it actually came from. So that's something I'm really excited about in the future.
We were talking earlier, and I think in an earlier episode, about how there actually isn't anything on the market right now that is coming up to replace like a Magic Leap 2 or a HoloLens 2 that has that completely see-through visor. Going forward,
Mhm.
there's things on the horizon that we know are going to be released soon,
Yeah,
and
we
yeah,
we've
it will be.
yeah we've kind of sobered up a little bit, right? Because all this investor money was dumped into this panacea of, like you said before, that the XR headset was going to be the next cell phone, and that really wasn't the case. Nobody wanted to wear, a box on their head. I do, but anyway, what I'm getting at is that I think investors in the future are going to realize that this is going to be smaller volume. That might be a little bit more expensive per unit at first, but you're going to have to kind of do a slow return on investment on this. It will be profitable in the long run, but don't expect some quick wins on hype. It's not going to happen anymore. So yeah.
Yeah, there won't be one headset to rule them all. There's going to be
Oh
all
heavens,
different
no,
kind for different use cases. I
no.
mean, that's what people thought back in 2018, that there was just going to be one headset that did everything that everyone wore all the time. And
Yeah, that's just not
or
the case. Yeah.
we
Yeah,
could
I was gonna say, I have a baseball hat, I got my gardening hat, I got my beach hat, different types of
yeah,
hats. No one ever said you only get one hat.
I have different sunglasses,
I
and
was
that's
just going
even
to
like
say.
less
Yeah.
functional.
There you go. There you go.
Oh, I was
Form
about to say
follows
do the same
function,
thing.
and that extends to technology.
Absolutely. And context. Yeah.
That is all we have time for today. We could easily talk for another hour, but Dan, where can people find you if you want to be found? Where can people connect with
Oh, sure. Yeah. DefiantXR.com. In fact, one of the things that you can do is go visit DefiantXR.com office hours, and you can go fly around in my office, which this has been on the whole time. So, yeah, turn yourself into a plane and go flying. So, DefiantXR.com/office hours. I'm on LinkedIn, where I just scream into the void in between coding. So, if you want to give me a follow on there, that's where I hang out. But yeah, really enjoyed
That's
this.
awesome. Yeah, thanks for offering that up. And yeah, be sure to connect with Dan on LinkedIn. Screaming into the void is very cathartic. So, the more people that do it
Agreed.
together. And we'd like to thank you all for listening. If you want to be a guest on a future episode, or you want to recommend a guest, please let us know in the comments or send us a DM on LinkedIn. And until next time, stay dauntless out there.
Right. Thank you much.